Have you ever wondered if an end is truly an end? Or maybe, just maybe, it's a profound new beginning disguised as closure.
It's a fantastic question, and it really echoes through history, doesn't it? Sometimes endings are loud, dramatic. Other times, well, they're more like a slow fade.
Welcome to the podcast, From Opinion to Insight, where we tackle some important questions from a historical perspective. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into one of those moments, a really pivotal one in Western civilization.
We're talking about the twilight of the mighty West Roman Empire.
Exactly. And how, from its vast, fragmented shadow, entirely new powers rose up. We're focusing particularly on the Franks today. So to really get our heads around this complex transformation, we've meticulously unpacked a pretty rich stack of sources for you today.
We're looking at ancient historical texts, penned by observers and chroniclers who were living through it, or shortly after.
We've also got detailed maps, which are great for tracing how borders shifted, how power flowed across the landscape.
And legal documents, too. Things like law codes, which really codified societal norms and tell you a lot about how people were expected to behave.
Plus, artistic depictions, how people saw their world, what they valued, what they feared. It all comes through in the art.
And bringing all these diverse perspectives together, well, it allows us to move beyond just a simplistic story, right? We can build a much more multifaceted, nuanced understanding.
Precisely. These aren't just dry facts or, isolated anecdotes. When you piece them together, they paint a truly vivid picture. It's about seeing the subtle shifts, not just the big dramatic collapses.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, it helps us build a more complete understanding of what was truly happening on the ground. For ordinary people, not just what a few elites wrote down, often with their own agendas.
Absolutely, because those sources do have biases.
Of course.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Our story begins not with a giant empire, but with Rome. A pretty humble city-state, really.
Just one city among many, initially.
But from those small origins, over centuries, relentless expansion, military innovation, political shrewdness, it just grew and grew. It burgeoned into this colossal world empire. And it reached its absolute peak, its largest extent, around 1717 CE under Emperor Trajanus. Just imagine that. A single power stretching from Hadrian's Wall in Britain,
all the way to Mesopotamia,
down to the sands of Arabia, across the Mediterranean coasts. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. But what's important to remember here is that this immense expansion, yes, it brought undeniable power, incredible wealth, technological advancement, but it also brought inherent, often unmanageable tensions. The very act of growing so large, of absorbing so many diverse cultures, so many different peoples, paradoxically, it sowed the seeds of future challenges.
It's like it became a victim of its own success.
In a way, yes. Its sheer vastness made it unwieldy, incredibly difficult to govern effectively from one single center, from Rome.
Right, so what actually held such a multicultural entity together for so long? It wasn't just the legions, surely.
No, although the army was obviously formidable, crucial, but it was also about infrastructure, that incredible, extensive network of Roman roads, meticulously engineered.
Facilitating swift movement of troops, yes, but also goods and information. Communication was key.
Absolutely key. And then there was the widespread dissemination of Latin, the language of administration, of law, and Roman culture itself, its laws, its architecture, its administrative practices, these spread everywhere.
So that was the glue, in a sense.
You could call it that. Binding disparate peoples and lands into a single, even if sometimes uneasy, unit, this cultural and infrastructural glue was just as vital as any legion.
Okay, so you have this massive, seemingly strong empire, held together by roads, laws, legions. But even with all that, from the 3rd century onward, cracks began to show.
They did, slowly at first then. Well, they widened pretty dramatically, which takes us into the sunset of an empire, a slow-motion decline that was anything but simple.
Where did the pressure first start showing? Internally?
Yes. The internal pressures were mounting significantly, revealing systemic weaknesses that Rome ultimately just couldn't overcome. From the 3rd century, you get what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. A period of intense political turmoil. We saw an alarming, rapid succession of emperors. Some sources suggest over 20 legitimate emperors in just 50 years.
Wow, that's incredible instability.
It is. And many were military commanders, often brought to power by their own legions through constant civil wars, which in turn meant the army gained excessive power. They could basically make or break emperors, dictate policy.
So power shifting away from the Senate, from civilian control.
Exactly. A profound weakening of central authority and a shift in who held the real power from the Senate House to the military barracks. This wasn't just instability, it was a fundamental change in the system.
And I guess political chaos usually goes hand in hand with economic problems.
Absolutely. The sources tell us about cripplingly heavy taxes needed to fund the military, the imperial court.
Which never seem to get smaller.
Right. But these taxes deeply burdened ordinary citizens, farmers especially. And compounding this, you had widespread crop failures, possibly due to climate shifts, disease outbreaks, and just the disruption of constant warfare. Food supplies were hit hard, leading to famine in many regions.
And the money itself, was that stable?
Not at all. Perhaps the most insidious problem was significant currency devaluation. Emperors, desperate for funds, reducing the silver or gold content.
So the coins weren't worth as much.
Exactly, leading to a rapid erosion of its value. Imagine trying to run an empire, or even just buy bread when your currency is rapidly losing purchasing power. Trade becomes difficult, savings evaporate. It's a vicious cycle.
So with all this going on, economic hardship, food shortages, how did people cope? What did they do?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the massive societal shift we observe. Many people began moving away from the once bustling urban centers back to the countryside.
Leaving the cities.
They weren't seeking opportunity out there. They were simply seeking survival. Cities were becoming dangerous, economically depressed, difficult to provision with food. This exodus indicates a profound weakening of the urban economy, which had been the heart of Roman prosperity. It's a clear sign of systemic failure.
And did this affect the social structure? Rome had that very rigid class system, didn't it?
You had the powerful senators at the top, then free citizens, and a huge population of slaves at the bottom. The gap between the rich and poor grew wider.
How so?
While the burden of taxes and instability fell disproportionately on the poor, the small farmers, the urban workers, this fueled resentment, internal division. The system became increasingly unsustainable.
So the empire's creaking under the strain. Did anyone try to fix it?
Yes. Emperor Diocletian, who came to power in 284 CE after another period of chaos, was a major reformer. He recognized the sheer unmanageability of the empire.
And what did he do?
He made a drastic decision in 285 CE. He formally split the empire into western and eastern parts, each with its own emperor, an Augustus, and a junior emperor, a Caesar, the Tetrarchy.
Wow, dividing the Roman Empire. That must have been a huge ideological shift.
It absolutely was. While presented as a pragmatic attempt to manage its vastness, a temporary administrative solution, it was in fact a clear signal of the empire's struggle to maintain central control. It acknowledged that one emperor simply couldn't effectively govern such a colossal, fragmented entity anymore. Roman unity, once sacred, was now officially divisible.
about threats from outside? You always hear about the barbarians.
Ah, yes, the barbarians, that was the Roman term, wasn't it? Reflecting their deeply ingrained sense of superiority. They famously divided the world into civilized, meaning themselves, of course, and everyone else.
The barbarians.
Yeah.
Especially focusing on the Germanic tribes living north.
Exactly. These were the others, perceived as wild, primitive, maybe a bit scary, and a constant potential threat to the borders.
But was that perception accurate? Were they just one monolithic group?
Not at all. That Roman stereotype obscured a much more complex reality. These Germanic peoples weren't a single entity, they were remarkably diverse. You had specific tribes like the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Saxons, the Alemanni, and of course the various Frankish peoples who become so important later.
And they had their own cultures.
Absolutely. Distinct languages, varied social structures, mostly living in villages rather than large cities. And crucially, they lacked the kind of written, codified laws the Romans revered. They relied more on customary law, oral traditions, different, yes, but certainly not uncivilized in their own rich contexts.
Do we have any contemporary descriptions of them? From the Roman side?
We do. And here's where it gets really interesting. We have Tacitus. Publius Cornelius Tacitus wrote Germania around 98 CE. It's a rare, though definitely biased, Roman perspective.
What does he say?
He describes their physical appearance: wild blue eyes, reddish blonde hair, large, strong bodies, clearly made an impression. But he also dives into their daily routines, their character. He says they'd sleep late, bathe, often in warm water, surprisingly, eat simple meals, but separately, not usually communal family meals.
And the drinking. Your stories about that.
Tacitus mentions heavy drinking, yes, often leading to quarrels and fights, even settled by combat sometimes. And he notes something quite striking about the warriors, the brave men. When not at war, leaving the running of the household, the farming, to the women, the elderly, the weaker members of the family.
Interesting. So the warriors didn't farm.
Apparently not much. Tacitus highlights this seeming contradiction. They loved laziness, yet they hated rest or peace. But perhaps for these Germanic warriors, leisure time, not having to do manual labor, was actually a mark of status. It showed others work to support them.
So Tacitus might have been doing more than just describing them, maybe using them as a sort of mirror.
That's a strong possibility. Some scholars think he was subtly critiquing what he saw as Roman decadence or softness by contrasting it with this perceived barbarian simplicity or hardiness. He sometimes romanticizes their purity. It's a complex text, not just a straightforward description.
Okay, so the Romans had this barbarian label, but the relationship wasn't always hostile.
Far from it. Despite the label and the frequent conflicts along the frontier, the relationship was incredibly dynamic. There were constant contacts, trade, diplomacy, and even significant periods of cooperation. A crucial, often overlooked example comes around 450 CE. Romans and various Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Franks, Saxons, Burgundians, others actually banded together, united against a common, truly terrifying threat.
The Huns.
The Huns, led by Attila.
They sound like the ultimate villains in this story. How are they described?
Oh, the descriptions from Roman and later Christian chroniclers like Ammianus Marcellinus or Jordanes, they paint a truly frightening picture, almost apocalyptic. They call them two-legged animals, barely human. Jordanes even claims they were descended from witches and evil spirits.
Wow, seriously?
Yes. Descriptions focus on their indescribable ugliness: small, deep-set eyes like slits, flat noses, scarified faces, no beards. They were portrayed as monstrous, moving with terrifying speed on horseback across the steppes.
But how reliable are those descriptions? Sounds pretty biased.
Extremely biased. You have to remember, these are Roman and Christian sources, writing out of intense fear and religious hostility. Such vivid, almost mythological descriptions serve to dehumanize the enemy, make them seem utterly alien, and ramp up the sense of existential dread they inspired.
Okay, so Attila and the Huns invade. What happens then?
Well, the historian Young details how Attila's invasion, some sources claim an army of 500,000, though likely an exaggeration, spurred the Roman general Flavius Aetius into action. Aetius managed to forge this incredible alliance. He united former enemies, Roman legions, and Germanic warriors against this common, overwhelming threat. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, or Campus Maracus, in 451 CE, it was a brutal, bloody battle. Not about Roman pride versus Germanic conquest at that point. It was purely about the survival of the West. A desperate, unified stand against an outside force that threatened everyone.
So what does this all mean? What does that battle show us?
It vividly shows how truly extreme external pressure can forge the most unexpected, powerful alliances. Even among groups previously considered enemies or others, survival became the only goal.
And this pressure from the Huns pushing westward, did that affect other groups too?
Massively. It was a major catalyst for what we call the Great Migrations, this vast movement of peoples across Europe. From the late 4th century onwards, the Huns' push from Central Asia caused domino effects.
How so?
Peoples like the Goths, Vandals, Alans, Burgundians, they were forced to move westwards, often seeking refuge within the Roman Empire's borders. They were looking for safety from the Huns, or sometimes for richer lands.
So they weren't always invading. Sometimes they were refugees.
Often, yes, seeking asylum. But their arrival in huge numbers inevitably led to conflict, displacement, competition for resources, and ultimately the carving out of new kingdoms within Roman territory as imperial control weakened.
Which brings us to a really significant moment, 410 CE. Rome itself.
The plunder of Rome in 410 by Alaric and the Visigoths, a moment that sent absolute shockwaves through the Roman world.
Why was it so shocking? Hadn't Rome faced defeats before?
Yes, but this was Rome, the city itself, the eternal city, the heart, the sacred symbol of the empire. It hadn't fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years, not since the Gauls in 390 BCE. The Goths occupied it for 3 days, plundering its legendary wealth.
So it was more than just a military defeat.
Much more. It was a profound psychological blow, a seismic event that utterly shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. People questioned how this could happen. St. Augustine wrote his huge work, City of God, partly in response, trying to make sense of it theologically.
Okay, so the West is weakened internally, facing huge pressure externally. It sounds like it couldn't last.
Ultimately, no. The West Roman Empire, already worn down by centuries of internal decay and these persistent external pressures, simply couldn't defend itself effectively anymore.
And then comes 476, the famous date. What actually happened?
The final symbolic act came then. The Germanic military leader, Odoacer, who was actually commanding what was left of the Roman army in Italy, mostly German mercenaries by this point, deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus.
Just deposed him, kicked him out.
Pretty much. He didn't kill him. Romulus was pensioned off. Odoacer simply sent the imperial regalia, the emperor's symbols of office, back to the Eastern Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. He essentially declared that the West no longer needed its own emperor. Zeno could rule the whole thing, nominally at least.
So that's the fall everyone talks about.
That's the date usually given, yes.
What's fascinating here, you were saying, is that it wasn't like a sudden crash into total darkness.
Not at all. It was largely a political formality by that point. The West Roman Empire had, in reality, already largely fragmented into a mosaic of Germanic kingdoms decades before 476.
So kings were already ruling parts of it.
Yes.
And did they just destroy everything Roman?
Far from it. This is the key point. They often admired Roman culture, Roman institutions. They adopted many elements of Roman governance, kept using Latin for administration, maintained Roman infrastructure where they could.
So 476, it's the end of a long process, the culmination of problems.
Exactly. But simultaneously, it heralded a new beginning. A profound transformation rather than a clean break or total destruction. New political entities were forming, blending Roman and Germanic traditions.
That idea that 476 wasn't a complete rupture but a transformation, it's really driven home when you look east, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The fall of the West did not signify a total end to Roman thought, its imperial legacy, or its sophisticated systems.
Yeah.
Because in the East,
The empire just kept going.
it did. The East Roman Empire, which we later called the Byzantine Empire, continued to flourish. Its center was Byzantium, refounded as Constantinople by Emperor Constantine back in 330 CE, modern Istanbul.
And it lasted for how long?
Nearly another 1,000 years. An incredible testament to continuity and resilience, completely dwarfing the lifespan of the Western Empire after the split.
What was different about Byzantium? Why did it survive and thrive?
Well, one key factor was its powerful, highly centralized structure. The basileus, the emperor, was an absolute monarch, holding immense temporal power and often significant spiritual influence, too.
Unlike the West, which is fragmenting into smaller kingdoms.
Exactly. A stark contrast to the increasingly decentralized West, where power devolved to local lords and kings. Byzantium maintained a remarkably well-organized imperial administration, a sophisticated bureaucracy, and a formidable professional army. This provided a degree of stability that allowed it to weather numerous storms threats from Persians, Arabs, Slavs, Bulgars.
And their society.
A rigid class society, similar to Rome's structure, free citizens, a powerful clergy, slaves. But perhaps the figure who best embodies the Byzantine effort to preserve and build on the Roman legacy is Emperor Justinian I.
He reigned in the 6th century, right? What's his significance?
Justinian, 527-565, was incredibly ambitious. He actually tried to reconquer the lost Western territories. His brilliant general Belisarius did regain North Africa from the Vandals and Italy from the Ostrogoths, though these gains weren't permanent.
But his lasting achievement wasn't military.
No. His truly enduring legacy was legal. The Corpus Iuris Civilis, the body of civil law.
What was that?
It was a massive project, a comprehensive collection, codification, and organization of centuries of Roman law, bringing together imperial edicts, legal opinions, basic principles, updating them and putting them into a coherent system, the digest, the code, the institutes.
And why was that so important?
Because this corpus served as the foundational legal model for centuries across Europe. It was rediscovered in the West, particularly from the 11th century onwards, and became a bedrock for legal thinking and the development of legal systems in many modern European nations, Italy, France, Germany, the Low Countries, even influencing English common law indirectly.
So Roman legal thought didn't just survive, it was actively preserved, codified, and transmitted by Byzantium.
Precisely. It's a remarkable story of intellectual and administrative persistence, shaping legal principles far beyond the Byzantine Empire itself.
What about culturally? Did Byzantium stay purely Roman?
Interesting shifts happened there. While Latin remained the official language for a while, Greek gradually became the dominant language of administration, literature, and the church. Remember, the Eastern Mediterranean was largely Greek-speaking anyway.
And the art. I always think of Byzantine art as being very different from Roman statues.
Very different. There was a significant divergence from Roman realism. Instead of lifelike statues and portraits focusing on human anatomy, Byzantine art became highly symbolic, stylized, and focused on the spiritual.
Like icons.
These holy paintings, often on wood, weren't meant to be realistic portraits, but windows to the divine, aids to devotion, bringing people closer to God.
And the mosaics.
Ah, the mosaics. Churches like the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople were adorned with these vibrant, glittering mosaics, made of tiny pieces of colored glass or stone, depicting biblical scenes, saints, emperors. They weren't just decoration. They created this otherworldly, divine atmosphere inside the churches, meant to inspire awe and reflect the glory of God and the empire.
So it really raises that question, doesn't it? How does art reflect the society and beliefs of the time?
Absolutely. In Byzantium, that shift from classical realism to symbolic, spiritual art was a profound statement. It reflected the deep religiosity of the empire, the focus on the divine, on theological concepts rather than just earthly appearances. Art served a primarily religious and imperial purpose.
And at the heart of all this, geographically and politically, was Constantinople itself.
The city was key. Its strategic location was just unparalleled, straddling Europe and Asia, controlling the Bosphorus Strait between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It was a major trade hub.
Crossroads of the world, almost.
You could say that. Ships and caravans converged there from all directions. The Silk Road from the east, trade routes from Russia, Egypt, Italy. This generated immense wealth.
Which allowed them to build strong defenses.
Incredible defenses. The legendary Theodosian walls, a triple line of fortifications, withstood numerous sieges for centuries. This wealth and security allowed Constantinople to remain the imperial capital, a vibrant metropolis for over 1,000 years, while Rome in the west declined significantly.
So Constantinople really was Rome's living inheritance.
In many ways, yes. It ensured the continuation of Roman traditions in governance, law, religion, art, architecture, preserving a continuity that was largely lost, or at least transformed, in the West for centuries.
Okay, let's circle back to 476 then. With this Byzantine perspective in mind, what's the profound meaning of that date?
Well, it reinforces that it wasn't an abrupt end, a cliff edge. It was the culmination of many complex problems in the West, a slow fragmentation. But crucially, it simultaneously marked the beginning of new developments, the reshuffling of power, the emergence of new Romano-Germanic societies.
So Rome didn't vanish. It continued transformed in the East.
And its legacy, its laws, culture, ideas about governance were passed on, adapted, and influenced the very societies that replaced it in the West and Byzantine society itself. In that sense, 476 truly marks both an end and a new beginning in European history. It's a pivot point where the past begins to reweave itself into new patterns.
It's fascinating how these historical transitions offer lessons for today, isn't it? Our own societies are constantly in motion.
Absolutely. We're shaped by technological advances, huge economic shifts, global migration, cultural contacts, just like the Roman and later Frankish worlds were, albeit at a different pace and scale.
And what stands out to you when you look at that comparison?
It's the idea that fundamental elements, legal principles, architectural styles, religious beliefs, ideas about community, they often persist. They adapt, they evolve, they combine with new elements to form new cultures, new societies. Things rarely disappear entirely. Change is constant, but it's often built on older foundations.
That adaptation is key. Can we see specific Roman legacies still around us today?
Definitely. Basic principles of Roman law, for example. The idea of innocent until proven guilty, the importance of written contracts, the very structure of civil law in many countries, especially in continental Europe, is a huge debt to that Roman legal tradition, passed down often via the Corpus Civilis.
So, studying the past, diving deep into periods like this, it really helps us understand how our world came to be.
Without a doubt. It shows that these huge changes, these transformations, are rarely instantaneous events. They're usually gradual, complex processes. Adaptation, evolution, the mingling of old and new. Understanding that gives us, I think, a deeper insight into how societies function, how they respond to challenges, and maybe even helps us think about our own future.
Okay. So as the sun was setting on the West Roman Empire, casting those long shadows, a new dawn was breaking. Not Roman, but Frankish. Let's turn to that now.
Right. The immediate aftermath of 476 in Western Europe, it's a landscape transformed.
And the cities?
They continued to empty out, mostly. People moved to the countryside seeking security, sustenance. Urban life declined significantly. And trade, well, long-distance trade, facilitated by Roman infrastructure and currency, largely dried up, replaced by very localized economy.
A power vacuum, essentially.
A profound power vacuum, decentralization. And into that vacuum, various Germanic peoples asserted control, including, significantly, the Franks.
Who were they exactly? Where did they come from?
They originated north of the Rhine River. Initially, they weren't one unified people, but a collection of related Germanic tribes. Over time, they gradually migrated southwest into Roman Gaul, modern France, and Belgium.
And their name Franks. Does that tell us anything?
It might. One theory connects it to their characteristic weapon, a type of throwing spear or axe called a franca or francisca. So Franks might have meant the spearmen or something similar. Highlights their reputation as formidable warriors.
Okay, so how do they rise from being just one group among many to dominating Gaul?
Their ascent really kicks off with a pivotal figure, Clovis. He was a chieftain of one group, the Salian Franks, in the late 5th century.
And he makes a big move.
A very big move. In 486 CE, at the Battle of Soissons, he defeated Syagrius. Sagrius was ruling a kind of Roman state in northern Gaul, a last vestige of imperial authority there.
So Clovis beating him was significant.
Hugely significant. It marked the definitive end of Roman political and military authority in that crucial region. It opened the way for Clovis's rise.
Was he just a military leader or more than that?
Much more.
Yeah.
He wasn't just about conquest. He was a brilliant and frankly ruthless unifier. He systematically brought rival Frankish groups under his single leadership. Sometimes through war, sometimes through assassination, sometimes through cunning diplomacy.
But military might alone doesn't build a lasting kingdom, right?
Right.
Especially over a mixed population of Franks and Gallo-Romans.
Exactly. Clovis understood that. He needed legitimacy, broader support, and he found it in a truly game-changing move. In 496 CE, though the date is debated, around then he made a strategic decision. He got baptized.
Baptized
Yes.
into Christianity.
Yes. Along with, supposedly, 3,000 of his warriors.
What was that so important? Weren't other Germanic kings Christian?
Some were, yes, but mostly Arian Christians, which was considered heretical by the Roman Church and the Gallo-Roman population. Clovis converted to Nicene Christianity, the mainstream Orthodox form, aligned with the Pope and the bishops of Gaul.
Ah, so that was the masterstroke.
Absolutely. What's fascinating is how political ambition and religious conversion intertwined. By becoming a Nicene Christian, Clovis transformed himself into a legitimate Christian king in the eyes of the influential Gallo-Roman aristocracy and the powerful bishop.
He gained allies.
Crucial allies. He forged a strong, mutually beneficial alliance with the Catholic Church, which was becoming the main organized authority across the fragmented West. It made Nicene Christianity the official Frankish religion, gave him moral authority his pagan or Arian rivals lacked, and helped integrate Franks and Romans under his rule.
Clever. Did he do anything else to consolidate power, bring order?
Yes, during his reign he also established the Lex Salica, the Salic law, the first written Frankish law code, likely finalized near the end of his reign, around 507-511 CE. It wasn't some abstract legal philosophy, it was very practical, designed for a society trying to move away from constant violence. It laid out specific fines, a war guild, or man money for various crimes from theft to murder.
So paying a fine instead of seeking blood revenge.
Exactly. A huge step towards establishing legal process over traditional blood feuds, which could tear communities apart. It aimed to bring more order and peace.
But was it equal justice for all?
Definitely not. The fines varied dramatically based on social status and ethnicity. Injuring or killing a free Frank cost significantly more than injuring or killing a Roman resident, and far, far more than harming a serf or slave.
So it cemented the hierarchy.
Absolutely. It starkly highlights the inequalities of the time. A free man caught stealing paid a certain amount. A slave caught stealing faced brutal physical punishment, like 120 lashes.
What about women?
The Lex Salica is famous, or infamous, for its clause regarding inheritance of land, specifically Salic land. It explicitly stated, "No part of Salic land shall go to a woman." This cemented patriarchal control over property.
So Clovis unites the Franks, converts, establishes law. Sounds like a solid foundation. Did it last?
Well, yes and no. The Merovingian dynasty he founded ruled for about 250 years. But there is a major built-in flaw in the Frankish system, inherited from Germanic tradition. The practice of dividing the kingdom among the king's surviving sons after his death. Clovis himself had 4 sons who inherited, partitioning the kingdom.
Ah, that sounds like a recipe for trouble.
It was. It led to constant infighting, civil wars, cycles of reunification and fragmentation. This practice severely weakened the Merovingian kings over generations. Royal power was constantly diluted and contested.
And eventually the kings became weak.
Increasingly weak. Later Merovingians are often called the rois fainéants, the do-nothing kings. Figureheads, really. The real power gradually drained away from them.
And into whose hands?
Into the hands of the Hofmeyrs, the mayors of the palace.
Mayors. Like city mayors.
No, more like chief ministers or prime ministers. Initially, they just managed the royal household, the king's estates. But because the kings were often incompetent or children, these mayors, through ability and ambition, accumulated control over the administration, the army, the treasury, effectively running the kingdom.
And the most famous of these mayors?
Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. He held power in the early 8th century.
Why the hammer?
He's most celebrated for his victory at the Battle of Poitiers, sometimes called the Battle of Tours, in 732 CE.
What happened there?
He led a Frankish army that defeated a large raiding force of Arabs and Berbers invading Gaul from Muslim-controlled Spain.
And this was seen as a huge deal.
It was later portrayed as a monumental victory, yes. As the moment Christian Europe was saved from Islamic conquest, it massively boosted Charles Martel's reputation and the prestige of his family, the Carolingians.
Okay, but let's unpack this, as you say. Was it really that decisive in the moment?
Well, modern historians tend to view it a bit differently. It was certainly an important Frankish victory, halting that particular large-scale raid deep into Gaul. But the Umayyad force might have been more focused on plunder than permanent conquest north of the Pyrenees at that point. Their defeat was a significant setback for them in Gaul, but perhaps not the absolute world-changing halt to expansion that later narratives claimed.
So the story became more important than the event itself.
The narrative definitely grew. It transformed Charles Martel into this legendary figure and, crucially, laid the political groundwork for his family to eventually take the throne itself.
Yeah.
It's a classic case of history being shaped by later interpretations for political gain.
And that groundwork paid off.
It certainly did. Martel's son was Pepin the Short. Pepin held the real power as mayor, just like his father, but he lacked the title of king.
He wanted the crown.
He did. And he made a bold move. Around 751 CE, he sought legitimacy from the most powerful religious figure in the West, the Pope in Rome. He essentially asked Pope Zachary, who should be king? The one with the title but no power, or the one with the power but no title?
And the Pope.
The Pope, needing a strong ally in Italy against the Lombards, gave Pepin the answer he wanted. So with papal blessing, Pepin deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, who was packed off to a monastery.
Wow, so the Pope basically authorized a coup.
Effectively, yes. He was revolutionary. This act officially ended the Merovingian dynasty and began the powerful Carolingian dynasty, named after Charles Martel. It legitimized their rule through divine sanction and forged this incredibly important, lasting alliance between the papacy and the Frankish monarchy.
And Pepin's son, he's the really big name, isn't he?
Indeed. Pepin's son was Charlemagne, Charles the Great. He truly built on the foundation his father and grandfather laid.
The father of Europe, they call him sometimes. Why?
For good reason. He reigned for a long time, nearly 46 years, and dramatically expanded the Frankish realm. He created the largest empire in Western Europe since the Romans, uniting diverse peoples, Franks, Lombards, Saxons, Bavarians, Avars under his rule. From northern Spain to deep into modern Germany and Austria, down through Italy, he laid much of the cultural and political groundwork for medieval Europe.
How did he expand so much? Purely military.
He was a relentless campaigner. He fought long, brutal wars against the pagan Saxons in the north, ultimately forcing their submission and conversion to Christianity. He conquered the Lombard kingdom, Italy, taking their crown. He pushed back the Moors in Spain, creating a buffer zone. He crushed the Avars in the east. He forced many other peoples to acknowledge his authority.
But perhaps the most symbolic moment of his reign, Christmas Day, 800 CE, in Rome.
Ah, yes, the imperial coronation. Pope Leo III, whom Charlemagne had recently restored to power after Leo faced rebellion in Rome, placed an imperial crown on Charlemagne's head while he was praying in St. Peter's Basilica.
What did that mean? Was he replacing the Byzantine emperor?
It was hugely symbolic and had profound implications. It signaled nothing less than the revival or rebirth of a Western Roman Empire, a Christian empire, distinct from the one in Constantinople and sanctioned directly by the Pope. It wasn't just a fancy title, it was a declaration of a new, legitimate imperial power in the West.
Did the Byzantines like that?
Not particularly. They saw themselves as the only true Roman emperors. Charlemagne's coronation created a rival and sparked centuries of tension and debate about imperial legitimacy, but it solidified the idea of a unified Christian West, with a divinely appointed emperor working in partnership with the Pope. It laid the foundation for the later Holy Roman Empire.
Beyond war and titles, what else characterized Charlemagne's reign? I've heard about a Renaissance.
The Carolingian Renaissance, yes. Charlemagne understood that a stable, unified empire needed more than just soldiers. It needed educated administrators, literate clergy, a common culture. He was genuinely interested in learning and religion.
So he promoted education.
Actively. He gathered scholars from across Europe to his court, like Alcuin of York. He encouraged the establishment of schools and monasteries and cathedrals. He mandated that clergy should be educated.
What did they study?
Primarily Latin, theology, the scriptures. But this effort led to a significant revival of learning. Monks diligently copied ancient manuscripts, both religious texts and classical Latin works by authors like Virgil or Cicero, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. They even developed a clearer, more standardized script, the Carolingian minuscule, which is the ancestor of our modern lowercase letters.
We even have proof of his interest in this, right? A letter.
Yes, there's a famous letter he wrote. He stresses the importance of education for monks, arguing that correct understanding of sacred texts requires correct speech and writing. He worried that errors in language could lead to errors in understanding God's will. It shows his personal commitment to raising intellectual standards.
How did he actually govern this vast empire? Was it centralized like Rome?
Not quite like Rome. The Frankish king, or emperor, held immense personal power, theoretically absolute. But the empire was viewed almost as his personal property, which led back to that problem.
Dividing it among his sons.
Exactly. That tradition persisted. Also, unlike Rome with its fixed capital, Charlemagne's court was itinerant. It traveled constantly throughout the empire, moving from one royal estate palatium to another.
Why move around so much?
Logistics, mainly. It was easier to move the court and consume the resources of a region locally than it was to transport vast amounts of food and supplies to one fixed capital over potentially poor roads.
How did he manage the regions?
He divided the empire into administrative districts. In border regions, more militarized districts called marches were run by margraves.
But how did he stop these counts from just becoming independent rulers?
That was always a challenge. He relied heavily on their personal loyalty, but he also implemented a system of oversight using royal envoys called missi dominici, the Lord's sent ones.
What did they do?
Typically sent out in pairs, often a bishop in a count, they traveled throughout the empire. They acted as Charlemagne's eyes and ears, inspecting local administration, hearing complaints, ensuring imperial laws.
And this ties into the feudal system.
Yes, the developing feudal system was a key tool for administration and military organization. Charlemagne, like his predecessors, granted land fiefs to his loyal followers, his vassals.
In return for what?
In return for their pledge of loyalty and, crucially, military service. These vassals were expected to provide knights and soldiers for the emperor's campaigns.
And could they grant land too?
Yes, these greater vassals could, in turn, grant smaller parcels of their fiefs to their own vassals, sub-vassals, creating this hierarchical pyramid of personal bonds and obligations, theoretically linking the emperor down to the lowest knight.
But it depended on a strong leader.
Absolutely. The system functioned effectively only under a strong monarch like Charlemagne, who could command personal loyalty and enforce obligations. We have examples of 8th century vassalage agreements that spell out these mutual duties. The vassal seeks protection and sustenance from a lord, and the lord provides it, while the vassal pledges to serve faithfully, fight when called upon, and remain bound by loyalty. It was a deeply personal system, not an abstract institutional one.
Okay, so Charlemagne builds this huge empire, revives learning, sets up this system. What happens after he dies in 814? Does it hold together?
Not really. Holding the empire together proved incredibly difficult, even for his son and successor, Louis the Pious. Louis inherited the entire empire as his brothers had died, but he lacked Charlemagne's commanding authority and military prestige. He faced numerous rebellions, including from his own sons.
So the division started even under Louis.
Yes, the tensions were already there, and after Louis the Pious died in 840, things really fell apart. A devastating civil war erupted among his three surviving sons, Lothair I, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald. Each wanted a piece or all of the empire.
How did that end?
After 3 years of brutal fighting, they finally reached an agreement. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 CE. This was a momentous treaty.
Why? What did it do?
It formally split the Carolingian Empire into 3 distinct kingdoms. Lotharii received the Middle Kingdom, a long, awkward strip running from the North Sea down through the Rhineland, Burgundy, and into Italy, along with the imperial title. Louis the German got the East Frankish Kingdom, roughly corresponding to modern Germany, and Charles the Bald received the West Frankish Kingdom, roughly modern France.
So the birth certificate of France and Germany, almost?
In a very real sense, yes. This division laid the crucial groundwork for the future political geography of Western Europe and the eventual emergence of distinct nations. The dream of a unified Western Empire, Charlemagne's dream, was effectively over.
What happened in these new kingdoms? Were the kings strong?
Not particularly, especially in the turbulent 9th and 10th centuries. They struggled immensely to defend their realms against new waves of invaders.
Who was invading out?
Vikings raiding from the north, sailing up rivers deep inland, horsemen from the east raiding into Germany and Italy, and Saracens, Muslim pirates and raiders attacking from the south in the Mediterranean.
That sounds terrifying for ordinary people.
It was widespread insecurity. And because the kings often seemed powerless to stop these raids, people increasingly looked for protection closer to home.
To the local lords, the counts and dukes.
Exactly, to the local strongmen. These lords began to accumulate more and more power in their own regions. They started treating their fiefs not just as grants from the king, but as hereditary possessions. They acted like little kings in their own territories.
So power became even more decentralized.
Drastically so. Feudalism, which Charlemagne used to try and unify, now contributed to fragmentation as royal authority weakened.
Let's shift focus a bit. What was life like for most people in the Frankish Empire? It wasn't all kings and knights, right?
Not at all. The vast majority of people lived and worked in the countryside.
And the economy was based on?
What we often call manorialism. Life revolved around large agricultural estates. Manors.
What was a manor like?
Typically, it consisted of the lord's house or castle, a village where the peasants lived, surrounding fields, pastures, woodlands, maybe a mill, a church. Critically, these manors aimed to be self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient, producing everything they needed.
Pretty much. They grew their own food, raised livestock, made their own clothes, tools, basic furniture. This self-sufficiency meant there was a significant decline in long-distance trade compared to Roman times. The money economy largely faded. Life became very localized.
And the people working the land, were they free? Slaves?
Their status was complex, somewhere between free peasant and slave.
How so?
They weren't property that could be bought and sold like slaves were in Roman times, but they weren't entirely free either. The status was hereditary, and crucially, they were tied to the land. In return for protection and the right to cultivate a small plot of land for their own family's survival, they had significant obligations. They had to work a certain number of days each week on the lord's own land. They also had to pay dues, or maybe providing spun wool or performing other services like building maintenance.
Sounds like a tough life.
Extremely tough. Constant labor, not just in the fields, but spinning, weaving, caring for children, preparing food, plus the obligations to the lord. and always living under the shadow of the Lord's authority, his demands, his potential punishments.
We have that chilling story.
Yes, Gregory, writing in the 6th century, tells this horrific story about a tyrannical Frankish noble. Two of his serfs, a couple, tried to flee and sought sanctuary in a church. Rouching lured them out by swearing a solemn oath that he wouldn't separate them either in life or death. He then had a massive tree trunk hollowed out, forced the couple inside, sealed it up, and had them buried alive together. A grotesque, literal interpretation of his oath. Gregory says the man was eventually pulled out, traumatized but alive, but the woman suffocated.
That's brutal.
It's a stark, terrifying illustration of the immense, almost unchecked power these lords could wield over their dependents. The vulnerability of the serf population was profound. Justice was often arbitrary and cruel.
Amidst all this decline and hardship, were there any improvements, anything getting better?
Actually, yes. Particularly in agriculture, there were some quiet but significant innovations happening during this period, laying groundwork for the future.
Such as?
One major one was the gradual adoption of the heavy-wheeled plow, often with an iron plowshare. This was much more effective than the older, lighter scratch plow, the ard, especially in the heavier soils of northern Europe. It cut deeper, turned the soil over, improved drainage and fertility.
Anything else?
Yes, the widespread adoption of the three-field system of crop rotation. Instead of the older two-field system, half planted, half fallow, they divided the arable land into 3 parts. One part was planted in the autumn with winter grains, like wheat or rye. Another part was planted in the spring with other crops, like oats, barley, peas, or beans. And the third part was left fallow to recover.
And that was better?
Much better. It increased the amount of land under cultivation each year from half to 2/3. It diversified crops, providing better nutrition and insurance against failure of one particular crop. It led to significantly improved agricultural efficiency and higher yields over time, which eventually helped support population growth in the later Middle Ages.
Wow, what an incredible journey we've taken. The rise of the Franks, this whole new world emerging, while the East, Byzantium, just kept that Roman legacy going.
It really drives home that idea, doesn't it? That what we label the end is so often just a complex, drawn-out transformation, a reshaping, not an obliteration.
Let's try and compare them directly. Governance, for instance. Rome and Byzantium versus the Franks.
Big difference there. Pre-476, West Rome and Byzantium had highly centralized imperial authority. A strong bureaucracy, clear chain of command, emperor at the top. The Frankish kings, by contrast, ruled in a far more decentralized, personal way, heavily reliant on the loyalty of local nobles, the counts and dukes, and that developing, often fragmented feudal system. Power was much more distributed, much less institutionalized.
Economy, Roman versus Frankish?
Worlds apart. Rome and Byzantium had relatively sophisticated urban commercial economies based on money, with vibrant trade networks, especially around the Mediterranean. The Frankish West became largely dominated by that self-sufficient agrarian economy. Long-distance trade declined sharply, cities shrunk. Culture and learning, too. A big contrast.
How so?
Rome and Byzantium championed classical culture, literacy, had traditions of public schooling. Greek became dominant in the East, where libraries preserved vast amounts of classical knowledge. In the Frankish West, while Latin remained vital for the church and administration, broader classical culture and widespread schooling definitely waned.
But the monastery stepped in.
Crucially, monasteries became these vital bastions, preserving knowledge, copying texts, providing what education there was, defining what some call the Dark Ages in terms of general intellectual decline, perhaps, but also acting as absolutely essential cultural refuges.
And finally, society. How did the structures compare?
Roman citizenship, while not equal, offered some concept of rights and potential mobility. Byzantium maintained a fairly rigid class hierarchy. The Frankish realm, though, saw the real rise of deep personal dependency. Feudalism tied lords and vassals, while serfdom bound the vast majority to the land and their lord in a way fundamentally different from Roman or Byzantine structures. Much more about personal bonds and obligations. This whole comparison really highlights that idea of persistence and adaptation, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
While political structures crumble, empires fall. But fundamental ideas, institutions, cultural threads like Roman law principles, the very idea of a unifying Christian empire, even farming techniques, they don't just vanish, they persist, they adapt, they get reinterpreted and woven into the new societies that emerge.
So history is this constant reweaving, old threads and new patterns.
Old elements find new ways to exist within new structures. It's a continuous, dynamic remaking of human experience.
And that's why looking back, this matters today. Because our world is doing the same thing.
Precisely. Our societies are constantly in motion, shaped by technology, economic shifts, migration, cultural contacts. We're living through our own transformations, just like they did. Maybe faster, maybe differently, but the process is similar.
So studying them helps us understand our own foundations.
Without doubt.
And it reminds us that big changes are rarely overnight sensations.
Right, they're usually gradual, complex processes, blending old and new, adapting, showing resilience. Understanding that gives us, I think, a much deeper insight into how societies actually function, how they transform under pressure, and maybe, just maybe, gives us perspective on our own future. It really compels you to wonder, how do we truly define the end of an era or an empire?
Especially when so much continues.
Exactly. When so much of what constituted that end continues to evolve, adapt, reappear in new forms, influencing everything that comes after. Perhaps the ends we think we experience today may be technological revolutions, geopolitical shifts, cultural transformations. Perhaps they aren't really closures at all. Perhaps they're just long, drawn-out transformations, complex reconfigurations that are shaping an unforeseen future, a future we're only just beginning to glimpse.
That's a profound thought to leave us with. Our present is just one long transition, echoing patterns from centuries ago.
Something to ponder, perhaps.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, tracing the echoes from the fall of one empire to the rise of new worlds. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper into the fascinating tapestry of history. We'll see you next time on the podcast, From Opinion to Insight.
Wondering about the future, discovering the silence, truth, and bringing together the story of humans. From opinion to insight, and from source to story, we follow the traces through time and memory, echoing patterns from long ago. Keep exploring, building tomorrow. What drives war? What builds a wall? What makes a rise? What marks a fall? We turn the page, we search the frame to understand what still remains. From opinion to insight, and from source to story, we follow the traces through time and memory, echoing patterns from long ago. Keep exploring, building tomorrow.